Folks, thanks for tuning in to the Drew Deeks channel today. I am pleased again to be joined by a good friend of mine, Mr. Brandon Caputo, who I think is thankful for a break after just watching and covering an entire OHL playoff run, ending with the Hamilton Bulldogs taking the OHL championship, which we are going to dig into specifically, though, about a couple of players, Brandon, that of course are Montreal prospect related, and there's a couple that have fans pretty excited. So we've got Jan Mysak and Arber Jackey. I think I got that right.
You did.
So these guys here, we're going to talk about them today. And we're also going to end with some Shane Wright content because the draft is, my gosh, I'm looking at today's date, not even like 3 weeks away. I think we're 2 weeks away or less. And we're going to talk about Shane Wright and see if he's still the consensus over up. Heck, you had a chance to see him in the playoffs also before Kingston was knocked out. But Brandon, let's just start right off with this playoff run the Hamilton Bulldogs went on, because these players certainly caught your eye, and I think we'll start with Jan Mysak here just to kind of jump into it. But I'll jump into him with you. What did you see from this fella here?
First off, before I start, I just thought of something with the NHL playoffs going on. What do you think about Arturi Lehkonen scoring for the Colorado Avalanche?
Well, I still got him up on my wall here. I'm pretty sure I do. He's over here. I'm trying to point to him. Can you see him now?
Yep.
I'm pointing right to him right here. Yeah, so there he is. I am very proud of Lecky. Not getting too excited just because Tampa's just the monster that they are, but certainly really proud and happy for Lecky. And, worst case scenario, Corey Perry gets a cup, former Hab now. So either way, a former Hab's getting one. So that's pretty fun.
Yeah. So sorry, I just want to throw that in there. But
yeah, for sure.
As far as the Hamilton Bulldogs, if you look at their playoff run, they swept through their first 3 series of the OHL playoffs. They handled Peterborough pretty easily. Then they took down the Mississauga Steelheads. One of those games went to overtime. Actually, game 4 went to overtime. Hamilton won that game. And then in the third series, they took down a very good North Bay Battalion team that actually knocked out Shane Wright's Kingston Frontenacs in 5 games. So it was a very impressive playoff run for the Hamilton Bulldogs. They had over 50 wins this season. They were the first place team in all of the Ontario Hockey League. So it was pretty easy for them going through the Eastern Conference. But then once they got to the OHL Championship and played against the Windsor Spitfires, who were also the top team in the Western Conference that year and had the most goals for, they were very good under head coach and former NHLer Mark Savard, really got that team playing well. And they kind of ran into a team I don't think that they had expected. Maybe they did, I'm not sure, but it was a lot longer of a grind than they were used to. It went 7 games, obviously, and at one point, the Windsor Spitfires had the lead in the series. So Hamilton, they really had to battle through some adversity, and they ended up winning it in Game 7 just this past Wednesday night by a score of 6-1. But it was not easy at all. There's a lot of mutual respect between the two teams and both coaches, Jay McKee and Mark Savard, both being former NHLers. So that was pretty big, and obviously Hamilton being able to win that on home ice in front of a huge crowd of when the Hamilton Bulldogs used to be the Montreal Canadiens, American Hockey League affiliate. So now they've got a Calder Cup and two OHL championships under their belt there at the First Ontario Center. They opened up the second level, and it was the highest rated attendance in the modern era for an OHL championship game. So very impressive season for the Hamilton Bulldogs, and former NHLer Steve Stais did a great job of assembling just a team that was a juggernaut from top to bottom.
Man, I still want to call it the Cops Coliseum. I still want to call it Cops, but pretty impressive run for them. And you know what? I like the fact that they faced what they faced in the finals against Windsor, because it showed that, they weren't just going to walk. I mean, it was a pretty, I don't know if you want to call it easy, but they certainly had a less challenging experience through the first 3 rounds. And then you finally get to Windsor, who, I mean, they've got Memorial Cup cups in their back. Niagara Falls native Justin Shugg being part of those back-to-back teams where they won and then lost one in 2009, 2010, I want to say. But they have a good reputation of winning as well. So all these years later, still doing well, Windsor is. So let's talk first about Jan Mysak and what you saw from him, because I know some fans know what they know, but you got to see him and Jackey up close. And I think a lot more fans are really getting excited about Jackey, which we're going to talk about him next. But let's start with Jan Mysak here and what you saw from him.
Yeah, Meshach, again, he wasn't the most notable player in the playoffs, but the way that Hamilton was structuring their lines, they had him playing on the third line because they wanted to spread out the wealth throughout the lineup. They obviously have had some top end players. They went and traded for Mason McTavish, who was the third overall pick of the Anaheim Ducks. They had him playing on the second line just because they didn't want to mess up their chemistry with their top line of Logan Morrison, Ryan Humphrey, and Avery Hayes, which was a dynamic line all year long. They still put McTavish on the second line, and then you put Mysak on the third line as an NHL prospect. I think it's pretty incredible that they had an NHL prospect playing third line. That shows you just how deep that team was. So he kind of had to play a little bit different of a role playing third line. He did get injured at one point in the playoffs as well, so he missed a couple of games. Did come back for the later series, but he finished with I'm trying to pick it up here in the series, in the championship series. Again, because of the role he was playing, he didn't necessarily show up on the score sheet. His only goal actually came in game 7 of the OHL championship. And I don't know if you can pull the video up, but it's from the Ontario Hockey League YouTube channel. And they actually had the goal. It was Jackey to Mysak. So hopefully Habs fans will get excited about that. So his only goal in the finals was in game 7 to go up 4-0. And he only had 2 points in the 7 games, but in total, he had 8 points, 11 points in the 16 games. So not too bad, but again, I think Habs fans would be expecting a little bit more from him. But just given the role that he played, he wasn't on the top power play. He wasn't on the top 6 because of the way that they structured it out. Hamilton sometimes didn't even play their full fourth line. They were running out, swapping in 1 or 2 forwards from their fourth line into those top 3 lines. So just the way that things fell with the coaching staff and kind of the game plan with that, he didn't get maybe as much ice time as he would. And if he was on a different team, he probably would have been playing easily, top 6 or maybe even top line minutes. But this Hamilton team was just so deep that they decided to kind of put him in that role, and he accepted it with grace and did what he needed to do to help his team win.
Now, on the other side of things, Arbor Jackey, and I'm pronouncing this, it looks, I can't even, anyway, you helped me with that before we jumped on here. But he really caught your eye throughout the entire Hamilton Bulldogs playoff run. So what do fans have to look forward to in Arbor Jackey? Because I've heard people on my channel saying that not enough people are talking about this kid.
Oh, he's definitely looks like he's going to be the real deal. The Hamilton Bulldogs actually got him from the Kitchener Rangers at the trade deadline, and that was a big move for them. They gave up a lot of top-end prospects, a lot of top-end draft picks, draft capital to go and get Arber Jackey from the Kitchener Rangers as an overage player. He has experience with Jay McKee, who is the head coach of Hamilton now, was the former head coach in Kitchener. So they did have that relationship already, and Jay knew what Arbor could bring to the team when they went in and acquired him. So he was just a polarizing figure throughout the playoffs. Again, he's one of those guys where he is the hockey cliche, hard to play against. This guy is the model of that. He's got a high motor. He's highly competitive. And at points during the playoffs, even his head coach, Jay McKee, had told us in the post game that sometimes he has to kind of reel him back a little bit because Arbor just gets so intense out there that he goes and tries to, hit anything that moves and gets himself into some bad situations where, he hits a guy in a bad spot, guy gets a penalty, and just kind of has to settle him down because he's so intense and he's got that high motor to always go out there and want to do everything possible and get into the scrums and things like that. But again, you don't want to do that every single shift and get your team into penalty trouble. He got a penalty in the Eastern Conference final in the OHL final, where he was actually projected to be suspended for a hit that he had made at the end of the third period. Windsor ended up getting a 5-minute power play out of that and winning the game in overtime. So he actually was not suspended for that play, which a lot of people thought he was or should have been. Came back the next game and had a big game. So Arbor Jackey, I think, is one of those players where he could transition well into an NHL defenseman because he plays the game hard. He knows what he has to do. He's always competitive out there, and he really stepped it up when Nathan Staios, who's been their top defenseman for most of the year, went out, and their captain Colton Cameron was out. So Arbor Jackey really had to step up in their absences until Staios came back later in the last series. But just really solid play from Arbor Jackey. And in the championship series, he had 7 points in the 7 games, 24 penalty minutes. So again, he does take some penalties, but does take some risks. But I think the coaching staff likes his intensity and what he can bring to the ice as long as he knows the boundaries and doesn't cross that line more times than not, because that's the way that he has to play to be successful.
Okay. Well, I'm curious to see what Luke Richardson could do with him on on the defensive coaching side for the Canadians eventually. But we should mention some information about him. And just while I have Jack Eye's information up here, a left shot defenseman, 6'4", 204 pounds, currently listed. And we got another guy coming in, Caden Gooley, who's got a similar stature, maybe different playing style, but. Is there anything else you can tell us about his game? I mean, we looked at his numbers. So in 18 games played in the playoffs specifically, Brandon, 6 goals, 10 assists, good for 16 points in 18 games. And then this season with the Hamilton Bulldogs, 33 games played, 6 goals, 11 assists, so 17 points in those 33 games. A pretty consistent numbers throughout his career in the OHL with Kitchener and then going into Hamilton. So offensively, though, if he focuses on that side of his game, what could fans maybe look forward to there?
Yeah, I mean, he was playing the top power play when Nathan Staios was out of the lineup, but mostly getting second line power play time. One of my colleagues, Colin Ward, had said at one point, "Why don't they put him in front of the net? He's a big body. He'll stand there. He'll take the beating, and he'll create space for his teammates in front of the net." But they never decided to do that. It was interesting. Jay McKee, his head coach, at one point had said that even in practice, he tries to mess with him, where he tries to go up and give him a body check, and Jay bounces off him as a not a small guy and a man who played in the NHL is getting bounced off by Arbor Jackey. He's a very, even though he's a young player, he's already looking like he's got the size to play in the NHL, and he's got that hard-nosed, gritty mentality where he's going to go out there and do whatever he needs to do to help the team win. Again, you'd like to see a little bit more from his offensive game, but just the way that Hamilton kind of structured their power play and things like that, he wasn't getting the top power play time that maybe he would if guys like Nathan Staios were out of the lineup. But I think there is some offensive ability to his game, and again, every shift he goes out there, you're getting a high intensity, high motor type player. And when the head coach says he has to kind of pull him back a little bit, that type of player transitions well to the NHL game, because they're always looking for those guys that are those hard-nosed players that are going to give you consistency night in and night out. And in an 82-game season grind, you want guys like that are going to show up every night and give it all. And again, you'd want to keep the penalties down a little bit. But I do think that he's going to be a very solid player defensively, and we'll see what kind of rounds out in his offensive game, because I do think there's still something to be desired there that he might be able to develop in the pro hockey game.
So what do you think the ceiling would be if you had to pick one for Jan Mysak at the NHL level, if for Habs fans to look forward to?
I would say a top 9 forward. I would hope that he could, maybe
or sorry, I meant to say Jack Eye to start with.
for Jack Eye. Okay. For Jack Eye, I think he could turn out to be maybe a fourth defenseman, maybe a 3-4 defenseman if he develops properly. Maybe the lower end of that, maybe a 5-6. But I do think that Montreal signed him as an undrafted player, right? So
yeah,
whatever they get out of him is basically going to be playing with house money at that point, because he was not drafted. But I think he's really earned his spot. And one of the guys in the OHL that has been the most polarizing this year was Arbor Jackey. You had the players in Windsor, or you had the fans in Windsor booing him every time he touched the puck. This is a guy that you hate to play against, but you'd love to have on your team, because he's going to do everything possible to make the opponent's life, not easy. And he's going to do everything possible to stand up for his teammates, because at any moment there's a scrum out there. And if number 8 was on the ice, you knew that he was going to go out there and try to stick up for his players, and have 4 guys in the coaching staff trying to pull him back onto the bench, because that's the type of player and the kind of character that he is. He's always a team first guy.
Well, that's good to note as well. Now, so it sounds like the hype train is a little higher on Jack Eye right now than necessarily Meshach, who you also saw on this same team with the Bulldogs on their way to the OHL title. But then, what would you say is the potential ceiling? Or maybe there's a bit more uncertainty under Meshach right now. So, what can you tell us about him?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit more uncertainty with Meshach right now, just because again I don't feel like he played a role in the playoffs. I don't necessarily think that he got the top ice time that he probably would have gotten on other teams, just because of how stacked this Hamilton team was. You have a guy like Mason McTavish playing second line. I mean, I don't know what else you can say about that when he's a top 3 pick in the NHL out of the Anaheim Ducks. And I think there's something more to be desired for Jan Mysak's game. I think he needs to garner that consistency a little bit more. You see flashes during games or even during stretches during the season that he could straight up dominate games, but then he goes quiet for a little bit, and we saw that in kind of the finals. He did not. He was not one of the most noticeable guys on the ice for Hamilton. They had a lot of other guys in their top six who really stepped it up. But I do think if he develops properly, possibly a top nine forward would be what I could project him as now. Maybe if he ends up, that consistency does get there with his game, maybe he could possibly be a top six forward and somebody that the Habs could build around. But right now, I just think there's too much uncertainty with his consistency level for me to project that he's going to be anything more if he's able to get that opportunity as a top nine forward. But again, more to be desired with his offensive game. And I think on a different team, he might have been able to kind of show that might have been able to show through more because of the fact that he wasn't playing as much ice time. They wasn't getting as much ice time as maybe he would have gotten on some other teams that weren't a juggernaut like Hamilton.
Right, makes sense. He played a role like you said, and he has an OHL title to take with him. So, if anything, hopefully taking some winning DNA. Both Jackey and Meshach. And I should mention his stature here. Meshach, 6 foot, 180 pounds, shoots left. He's a centerman. So that's just to clarify for those that weren't clear on that exactly. But 61 games played this season with Hamilton. Meshach had 34 goals, 30 assists, 64 points in those 61 games. But then in the playoffs, 17 games played, 4 goals, 7 assists, 11 points in those 17 games. Not as much of a standout, but hopefully there's just more to be desired there. And
he was willing to play the wing as well. They had him switch from the center to the wing, just the kind of way that Hamilton structured their lineup. They really moved guys around, and he was willing to go to the wing, go to center, whatever they had him, whatever role they wanted him. He was happy with playing.
Okay, that's good to note as well. And that means he's coachable to me, and that's what I'm hearing there. So June 24th birthday. So he's going to be 20 years old in just about under a week. And Jackey, 21 years old, actually. So yeah. I feel like the maturity, it just naturally is already a step ahead for as far as Jackey goes. He's had more playing time, more development time. Now, let's finish with this one, because I think that fans are getting real fired up for this draft with the NHL season winding down. So a lot of people really hyped on Slafkovsky. There's such a debate still until the day of the draft. No one really knows. People think that the Habs might try to trade Josh Anderson to try to get the second overall pick from New Jersey. There's all kinds of talk, but let's focus on this one for now, because you had a chance to see Shane Wright more than once throughout this season and through the playoffs. And is there any doubt in your mind still about this guy and if he'll be taken by the Canadiens first overall?
I don't. I think he's still going to go first overall. Again, it would have been nice to see him make a long run in the OHL playoffs and maybe go to the Memorial Cup like Hamilton is about to do right now, which could be great exposure for guys like Jackey and Meshach to kind of raise their kind of status within the organization, as far as, keep an eye on these guys, because they're going to such all the eyes on junior hockey is going to be on the Memorial Cup every year. So you always see some guys that are, drafted or assigned as undrafted guys that get that opportunity to play on that big stage in the Memorial Cup, because it is, the Stanley Cup of junior hockey. So it would have been nice to see Shane Wright get to that this year, but you have to look at it. You can only go as far as your team, how great your team is. You look at guys like Conor McDavid. He never won a Memorial Cup, and one player can only get you so far, especially in junior hockey. And Shane Wright did all he could this year. He had a great second half of the year. He ended up finishing with 94 points, 63 games, only 22 penalty minutes. So he's a guy that doesn't take a lot of penalties. He's a very disciplined hockey player. He has a great head on his shoulders. He's not going to get too rattled about things. And again, a 1.49 point per game average is nothing to be upset about, especially considering his first half wasn't that great. But you go into the playoffs, and his Kingston team, like I mentioned, just was not deep enough, I believe, to make any sort of run. Their defense wasn't what it needed to be, and their goaltending wasn't up to snuff, especially when they came up against a team like North Bay, who really steamrolled them in 5 games after they had some trouble with the Oshawa Generals, who were a very flawed team when Oshawa took Kingston to 6 games. So it wasn't like Kingston really had an easy road at all. And when you have guys like Martin Chromiak, who's a top end draft pick of the LA Kings, and Shane Wright, it's difficult, right? Because you have to rely on those guys at all points, and you're double shifting them. You're playing them for the whole 2 minutes of power plays at times with Shane Wright exclusively. And he had 14 points in those 11 games. So he still had an over a point per game average, but I think people were expecting him to kind of be a guy that was a catalyst to kind of get them up to maybe face a team like Hamilton in the Eastern Conference Final, and maybe go on to face Windsor in the OHL Championship. But again, there's only so much that he could do, and I think that he did what he had to do, but just did not get the help from his teammates. And he'll be the first one to admit that he didn't do a good enough job, because that's the kind of player that he is. He always wants to talk about his teammates. When I had spoken to Jimmy Gilchrist, the longtime voice of the Kingston Frontenacs, he always talked about that early in the year. He was very upset that people wanted to just talk about him. He wanted to talk about the team. He wanted to talk about his teammates, and he really just didn't want the attention to be all on him. He wanted to focus on hockey, and I think that was what kind of hurt him at the beginning of the season, was trying to be able to deal with all of that pressure and expectation and the eyes that were on him going in as the first overall pick. So I think Shane Wright had a good year, especially the second half. And again, like I keep mentioning, he didn't have any penalty minutes in the playoffs. So again, a very disciplined player, a very smart player. You got to see him when he played against Niagara, which obviously wasn't a good team this year, but he made a couple of nice plays and gave you a few flashes of what you can expect from a guy that's a elite playmaker at the next level. And even Jimmy Gilchrist, the voice of the Kingston Frontenac, said he would be completely shocked if Shane Wright was back in Kingston next year and in junior hockey, because he thinks he's that NHL ready with his two-way game. That's going to take some time, I think, on the offensive side, but defensively, I think he's going to be a very solid two-way centerman if the Montreal Canadiens decide to take him first overall, which I think he's still ranked at, and he should still be the first pick.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, because that's new information of any kind is helpful for any fans that are just curious about what the future looks like for this Canadiens team, and if they're going to take him, and what they can expect. And my last question with Shane Wright, I guess, would be, fans seem to forget, or some folks in general, whether it's scouts as well, seem to forget that he missed an entire year of development. So for what we're seeing from him, still being relatively impressive, I would say, was missing that year. Is that really what's even bringing more doubt maybe to people, is that he missed an entire season? Like, do you think it would be worth considering bringing him back for another year of junior just because of that? Or do you really think that it's not necessary based on what you've gathered?
I think he could go back for another year. But when you're the first overall pick, you expect them to be with the team next year, which the Buffalo Sabres sent Will Power back to college, and he went and played for Michigan University last year. So it can be done where you send the first overall pick back. I don't think they necessarily have to play in that first year, like you kind of see in other sports, like football, where the first pick has to play automatically. I think in hockey, taking a slow, especially. I guess you could say, especially when the Habs are in a rebuild right now, they don't really need Shane Wright to play right away, and they're not trying to compete right away. So if being on a team that's not going to win a lot of games next year isn't going to be great for Shane Wright's development, why not send him back to junior and see if Kingston can put some pieces around him to kind of go for a Memorial Cup run, because obviously they came up short this year. But I would say that Shane Wright, I like the fact that that he's not one of those selfish players. I do think that he's one of those players where he tries to make those other teammates around him better. And I do think that having him go back for another year wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. I think that second year of development, like you kept mentioning, Conor McDavid spoke about that when he was drafted. That second year that he had was very big in the Ontario Hockey League, especially for guys that are granted exceptional status. You got to remember that if they're coming into the league at 15 years old, guys like Shane Wright and Connor McDavid, John Tavares, they're granted exceptional status at a very young age. So they have that they're still teenagers. They're still very young people at that point to try to get into that OHL mode and trying to learn junior hockey when the other teams are going to go after them. He had a great exceptional status year, and I think missing out on last year was a very big thing. And now this being his draft year, I think there was a lot of pressure on him to go in there and compete, considering he had missed the last year, like you mentioned. So he didn't go play in Europe. He didn't go play in any of these other leagues. So really it took him a while to kind of get going, and he had all that pressure on him, right, being in his draft year. So I do think that second year of development that he missed out would be something that maybe the team looks at and says, let's send him back and he can go play the third year of his OHL career that he really should have had if the season wasn't canceled with the pandemic.
I don't think it could hurt. I mean, I don't know if he has. Some people feel like he may not have much more to learn at that level, so maybe that's why they want to take him to the next level and just have him start developing parts of his game that will get him NHL ready, I guess. So that being said, that's all we got for today, Brandon. But I really appreciate you jumping on and sharing what you did about these guys, and I think just based on where the rebuild's at. There's potentially some players to be excited about. You don't want to get too far ahead, but I mean, we're getting to pick first overall. I'm learning a lot about Arbor Jackey here, just talking with you, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I was fired up about Caden Gooley, but I'm like, I'm more excited about this kid. I think I don't know, I haven't
Yeah.
decided yet, but Brandon, where can everybody find your stuff? The Armchair GM Sports Network. Just tell everybody where they can find your stuff, and you're an OHL analyst, but you're a lot more than that too. So just go ahead and tell folks where they can find your stuff.
Well, I don't want to take up 5 minutes of your time, but I will say that you can find the Armchair GM Sports Network on YouTube and any audio platform as well. We are on demand there for all of our audio podcasts. And then you can also follow me at Caputs13_AGM. And again, a lot of junior hockey content from me and from our Dog Pound podcast when we cover the Niagara Ice Dogs in depthly, which we'll hope to do more of next year. And yes, a lot of other things that I won't go in depth about. But if you go and check out the Armchair GM Sports Network and armchairgmsports.com, you'll find links to all of our other platforms and all the things that we do offer, because it is an extensive list. So I don't, like I said, I don't want to take up a lot of your time, but I do appreciate you having me on. And I didn't want to be I wanted to be nonpartisan today, not wearing any Sabres gear, because again, I went through a long rebuild with the Sabres. So I don't want to get into that, but yeah, hopefully the Habs rebuild is not going to be as long as what I've endured and what a lot of Sabres fans have endured with that. So let's hope that Shane Wright and some of these other prospects and Arbor Jackey can develop much more quicker, and you're not going to be sitting here in 2032 still talking about a rebuild.
No kidding, right? Well, I do like a lot of folks. I heard on another podcast recently too, a very well-known one, that the Sabres are going to be a fun, exciting team. They already are. Like, once Jack Eichel left, like, it's a whole new era, and honestly, I'm excited about them as well. So Jay McKee, we should mention. I got his autograph years ago. My gosh, he was a former Buffalo Sabre as well. I was going to mention that when you're talking about him with the Bulldogs there in the Spitfire series. But anyway, thanks so much again, Brandon. Can't wait to have you on again. And folks, thanks for watching. If you like what you see, you know what buttons to push, you know what to do. So we'll see you again soon, folks. Thanks again for your time, Brandon.
No worries. Thanks, Drew.